The Steam Deck just got even cheaper, but there's a catch. And let's check out the latest Steam Deck competitor. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Deck Ready. I hope you're having a great week. Lately on my Steam Deck, I have been playing the 1998 version of Resident Evil 2, and I cannot believe I've never played this before. Resident Evil is one of my favorite series ever, but I started the series at Resident Evil 4 and worked my way up. So I decided to go back and play the PS1 version on my Steam Deck, and it's been perfect. EmuDeck by default uses DuckStation, and Leon and Claire's stories are split up between two discs. So after I beat Leon A, I was like, how do I change the disc and keep my save? I figured it out. You just make an M3U file, which is like a text file called Resident Evil 2. And then in the first line, you put the disc 1 queue name. And then in the second line, you put the disc 2 queue name. And then when you're in the game and you want to switch discs, you just bring up the quick menu, switch the disc, scroll down to power, and then click reset PS1. And when you do that, it'll reset with the right disc in the fake digital console. I can't believe this is a thing you can do in 2023, but it's awesome. That will work for pretty much any multi-disc PS1 game. I wasn't able to get it to work with Dreamcast, but I'm still working on that. So yeah, this game is great. And if you've never played it before, don't be scared off by the tank controls like I was, because it's like the easiest, like 1-inch tall barrier to get over. All right, so the first news story I have for you guys today is that the Steam Deck is now available in a refurbished form, and not just from GameStop. So we talked about how GameStop had a leaked flyer that basically said they were going to start selling refurbished Steam Decks that they were refurbishing in their stores. I kind of steered people away from it just because, while I have had decent luck with GameStop in the past, I worked for Austin Evans for a very long time, and we did quite a few videos where we went to GameStop and spent a lot of money on used consoles, and they came back pretty disgusting. Like, you would bring them out of the box and there would be like bugs falling out of them sometimes. So I wasn't totally into the idea of buying a refurbished Steam Deck from GameStop. And it seems like Valve not only A, felt the same way, but B, realized they could make some money on this as well, because as of today, you can go ahead and buy refurbished Steam Decks right from Steam. And the pricing on these is really good. So if you bought a brand new Steam Deck right now, you'd pay $399, then you'd pay $529 or $649, depending on which version you bought. But for these refurbished models, if you want to get the 64 gigabyte one, it's $319. For the 256 gig, it's $419. And for the 512, it's $519. So on the 512 edition, you are saving like quite a bit of money on this. But me personally, I think I would probably go for the 64 gigabyte model for $319, and then pay $100 for a 1 terabyte SSD, reflash it, and then you've got a 1 terabyte Steam Deck for like $20 more than the 64 gigabyte one would have cost new. I'm guessing that a lot of these refurbished Steam Decks that they have up for offer are from RMAs. Like, when people would send in their Steam Deck before Valve was working with United Radio, a lot of the time, no matter what the issue is, as soon as they got it and verified that you sent their Steam Deck to them, they would just send back a brand new one to you, which is what happened to me when my Steam Deck broke the first time. And then when United Radio took over, they're a lot more stingy with replacing Steam Decks, but they still do it. So I'm sure Valve has amassed quite a few Steam Decks that they could easily fix up and resell over the past year and a half or so. And at first I was worried about this because I figured United Radio would be testing these things before they go out. And if you look up United Radio and Reddit, you can see the horror stories that people have had both with the Steam Deck and with Nintendo products. Like, there have been issues where people send in their Nintendo Switch to get fixed and they have rare Joy-Con on them, and they come back without the Joy-Con, or they have completely different ones, and United Radio just basically throws their hands up and says you're lying. And then I had an issue where when they got my Steam Deck, they opened it up, and I'm pretty sure they broke it and blamed it on me because they saw I had upgraded the SSD, which really sucked. But as Valve puts it, every device goes through a complete factory reset, software update, and an extensive examination involving over 100 tests at one of Valve's facilities. Among these tests are controller inputs, the audio system, the screen, the internals, and battery health is also assessed to ensure proper functionality and longevity. So yeah, it seems like they're doing everything right with these refurbished models, and the best part is they have a 1-year warranty. People were asking Lawrence from Valve if the warranty applies to the GameStop ones, and he was saying that the GameStop ones have their own GameStop warranty. So once again, I probably wouldn't trust GameStop, but he also said that the Valve version has a 1-year warranty just like a brand new Steam Deck. So there's really no reason not to get a refurbished one unless you're just really that against using a Steam Deck that someone else has used before. But yeah, if I was back in high school or even college and I still hadn't been able to afford a Steam Deck, taking this much off the asking price, I think is really cool for a refurbished device. You know, they're already selling this thing at a loss. It's very cheap compared to other competitors like the one I'm going to talk about in the second half of this video. So to see them discount it this dramatically, I think it's pretty cool, and it just gives people more ways to get a Steam Deck and get into this ecosystem, which I really appreciate because I love talking Steam Deck with my friends around me. But yeah, they did say that they expect these things to sell out pretty quickly and they'll just go in and out of stock as they get them. So if you don't get one in the first day, don't worry about it. You'll probably be able to get one as time goes on. But yeah, at the time of recording this video, all 3 models are still available. And for me personally, I think this is a great way to go, especially if you're going to upgrade your SSD. All right, next up here, I want to talk about this new handheld I got here in the studio from my friends at Ayaneo. They sent this over to me and it's the Ayaneo Air 1S. They emailed me and they asked if I wanted to check it out. And when I saw the specs on this thing, I was immediately interested in it. So I've actually looked at the original version of this here on the channel before, the Ayaneo Air, and I thought it was pretty good. It just didn't do enough great to make me want to ditch my Steam Deck for it, but man, I have been having a lot of fun with this handheld. On the outside, it's extremely similar, if not exactly the same as the last model of this handheld, the Ayaneo Air. But this time around, instead of getting a white colorway, they gave me a black one, and the top buttons, like the top rail and then the triggers and the bumpers, those are actually like a cool navy blue style color, and they look really good. The real improvement with this thing is all internal. So the model I got has the AMD 7840U, which is a really fast processor. It's got 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 500 gigabyte SSD, and that's going to only run you around $800. I say only, but I've noticed that as time has gone on, the prices on these Ayaneo handhelds, you know, the ones where they can't subsidize the cost of the parts by working with AMD or just taking a loss on it because they have a storefront like Steam, the prices have been falling pretty much in line with something like the ROG Ally coming out. So getting this thing down to $800 for the specs that it has, I honestly think is pretty good, because what really sets it apart is its 5.5 inch 1080p AMOLED screen. I am not joking when I say this might be the best looking screen in a handheld I have ever seen. And the fact that it's 5.5 inches means that even if you're running games at 720p low on this thing, they're going to look extremely good, just because A, the screen is small enough, and B, the fact that it's AMOLED and has incredible color reproduction does a lot of the heavy lifting that running the game at lower settings kind of loses. I'll talk about games more in a second though. So from a hardware standpoint, I love this thing. It is built extremely solid, and the brushed plastic chassis feels really good in the hand. It feels super premium. The fans are located in a really good spot so that the hot air isn't going to hit your hands as it's coming out of the back of the device. I did notice it heating up a lot when I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, but it didn't really heat up to the point where it was hurting my hands, which I have heard is an issue with other Ayaneo devices. So that is not an issue on this one. The only gripe I have, which is totally up to personal preference, is that the D-pad and the face buttons feel a little bit mushy, but they totally get the job done. And I don't think they're any more or less mushy than what we have on the ROG Ally. They're just not on par with what we have in the Steam Deck, and I just feel like that's worth knocking it for, because I also knocked the ROG Ally for the same thing. Now, my preferred Switch for a long time was the Switch Lite, so I'm kind of used to what that thing feels like when you pick it up, and I immediately noticed that this thing is way heavier, and that makes sense because they're packing a lot of hardware into this thing, but compared to a Steam Deck or an ROG Ally, it doesn't really feel any lighter or heavier than either of those devices. And I played Dead Cells on this thing for a very long time and my hands never got tired, and that kind of just adds to the whole premium feel of it. So I'm not too worried about how heavy it is, but some people might have wanted to know about that. Going back to the chip inside, it is extremely strong to the point where this thing definitely can overheat if you max out the TDP, but it defaults to around 20 to 22 watts, and I felt like that was totally enough. I booted up Baldur's Gate 3, and at 720p medium settings with no FSR, I was able to get a hard locked 30 FPS, which is about the same settings I get on the ROG Ally, and obviously that's better than what I get on the Steam Deck. At the beginning of the game, at least, you hold 30 FPS running the game in 800p medium settings with FSR set to quality, but as you get later on into the game, it really falls apart quick, whereas on this thing, I'm a little bit farther into the game, and it is holding a hard lock 30 FPS, and seeing it on an AMOLED screen at 5.5 inches, it just looks absolutely incredible. It kind of reminds me of what playing Divinity Original Sin 2 was like on the Switch, but like if it looked and ran a lot better. And honestly, the battery life didn't seem too far off from what I'm getting on the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally. So yeah, from a AAA games perspective, I think this thing is really cool. They also have the iSpace app, and they've improved it so much since they released the Ayaneo Next, is I think the first one I looked at. I looked at that handheld before the Steam Deck even came out, and I was a little bit worried about that software on this thing going into it, because back then the English was broken in the app, things were organized weird, it wasn't clear on what each slider did, but this time around they've really simplified it. They've cleaned up a lot of the English, and the first and easiest thing to access when you open up their version of the quick access menu is the frame rate limiter, and then below that is the TDP, which are like the two most used things I would say by me on a gaming handheld. So yeah, when I booted up Baldur's Gate 3, I wasn't really satisfied with their in-game frame limiter, so I used the Ayaneo one and it worked totally fine. Whereas on the ROG Ally, their frame limiter is totally worthless. Like if you set it to 30, I notice games will go from like 27 to 32, which obviously looks like. So yeah, when I have it plugged into my 4090 dock, I use NVIDIA control panel to limit the frames of games. And then when it's not plugged into my dock, I use RTSS, and that works totally fine. But having the software do what it's intended to do on this Ayaneo Air 1S, that is an A+ rating for me. And I'm glad that ISpace has really improved over the past couple of years, and I like to see where it goes in the future. While this thing can definitely hold its own on AAA gaming, I think where it really shines is with indie games. It ran Dead Cells right out of the box at 1080p 60, and that was an awesome experience. The Messenger works really well. Katana Zero works phenomenally and looks incredible on the OLED screen. Cult of the Lamb I had no issues with. I also paid for the early access to EmuDeck and tried out some games like Mario 64, and all of those worked really well. Now, of course, all of those games look and run really well on the Switch OLED, but what the Switch Lite doesn't have is an OLED screen, and it's also not 1080p. So if you like the form factor of the Switch Lite, but you also have a lot of these games in your Steam library already, or you use sites like Green Man Gaming or G2A to get them extremely cheap because games aren't discounted all that much on the Switch, this thing really does feel like a no-brainer purchase, especially if you're just a hardcore PC gamer, because you will be able to get that AAA performance out of it when you really want it. The only caveat to all of this is that I've only had it for about 2 weeks now, and I have used it quite a bit, and it still feels like when I took it out of the box. I've just had issues, and I've heard of issues with Aya hardware, and because these things come from China, you know, getting them repaired isn't the easiest. But I will say, out of all the Aya devices I've held, including the Ayaneo Air from last year, this thing feels like a step above in terms of quality from just a hardware standpoint and even a software standpoint. Getting from starting it up from the first time into Windows, I didn't see any Chinese language stuff written out. It was just a full-on regular version of Windows 11, and also ISpace didn't even make me log into it to actually take advantage of it. So yeah, from a premium standpoint, I think they actually are getting pretty close to justifying that $800 price tag that they're asking for this. Now, of course, they have an Indiegogo thing set up for it, and the problem is by the time you actually get your hands on this, they'll probably have a new version of the Ayaneo Air, which is annoying to people, I know, but they also offer other variants, like a 1TB SSD one that has 32 gigs of RAM. I think that one's only around $900. I'm just gonna say what I always say. I love this hardware. I wish they would slow down on making it, because it's kind of hard not to feel FOMO. When you order something, you wait for it, you get it, and you're excited, and then you realize that the Indiegogo for the sequel to that device has been up for a week and a half now. But outside of that, I really like this handheld. It runs every game that I throw at it. It has less issues running them than the ROG Ally did at launch. It really has been a plug and play experience out of the box, and updating Windows was even a breeze on it. So if you're in the market for a Switch Lite style handheld, I can't recommend the Ayaneo Air 1S enough. I will have a link down in the description to the Indiegogo in case you want to pick one up. Anyway guys, that's all I have for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.